Have you ever felt kind of trapped, by your job, your mortgage, all your stuff? Ever just wonder what would happen if you walked away from it all? Well, in 1854, a guy named Henry David Thoreau published a book about doing exactly that. It's called Walden, and honestly, it's one of the most famous experiments in simple living ever. So let's dive into the pretty radical ideas behind it.
So, picture this. For 2 years and 2 months, Thoreau goes and lives by himself in the woods of Concord, Massachusetts. Now, he wasn't some hermit totally cut off from the world. His town was just a mile or so away. But he was living in a tiny house he built with his own 2 hands, right on the shore of Walden Pond, all to conduct this big experiment in what it actually means to be alive.
This one line, this is it. This gets to the absolute heart of why he did it. This whole adventure wasn't just a quirky vacation, it was his diagnosis of the society he saw all around him. Thoreau truly believed that most people, even though they looked fine on the outside, were silently suffering. Let's really unpack what he meant by that.
So Thoreau, he's looking at his neighbors, good, hard-working people in his town, and he sees something that just startles him. He wrote that they appeared to me to be doing penance in 1,000 remarkable ways. He saw their lives not as something joyful, but as this kind of endless, punishing work with no real payoff in sight.
So what was causing all this desperation? Well, Thoreau's answer was pretty out there for his time. He believed we aren't enslaved by some big, bad outside force. Nope. He said we're enslaved by our own desires, our ambitions, and the very things we work so hard to get. In his view, we are the ones who forge our own chains.
He had this incredible phrase for young men who inherited land or a family business. He called them serfs of the soil. Just think about that for a second. Instead of the farm being this amazing gift, it becomes a life sentence. He said their big misfortune was to have inherited farms, houses, barns, cattle, and farming tools because, as he put it, these are more easily acquired than got rid of. The property ends up owning the person.
And he didn't pull any punches. He called the constant struggle for more wealth, more possessions, a fool's life. He saw people spending all their best years laying up treasures which moth and rust will corrupt, only to get to the end of their lives and realize they completely missed the point of living in the first place. It's a pretty devastating critique when you think about it.
And here, Thoreau makes a really provocative comparison. At a time when the country was fiercely debating slavery, he pointed to another, more subtle kind of bondage. He wrote, "It is hard to have a southern overseer. It is worse to have a northern one. But worst of all, when you are the slave driver of yourself." His point? The toughest, cruelest master you'll ever have is the one inside your own head.
This really lays out the core conflict, doesn't it? On one side, you've got what society tells you to value. Thoreau noticed that people were way more worried about having a patch on their clothes than having a sound conscience. And on the other side, you've got what he argued is actually respectable. He's basically asking us to completely rethink what a successful life even looks like.
Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? This is where the whole Walden experiment really kicks in. Thoreau's big plan was to strip his life down to the absolute bare essentials. The idea was to peel away all those layers of luxury and convenience to figure out what was actually necessary to live, and by doing that, discover what was truly important.
This is the fundamental question that drove him out to the woods. It sounds so simple, right? But how many of us have ever really, truly stopped to ask it? What do we really need to survive and to thrive? Not what we want or what our neighbor has, but what is absolutely 100% essential. And after a whole lot of thinking, Thoreau boiled it all down to just these 4 things, at least for someone living in a place like New England: food, shelter, clothing, and fuel. That's it. That's the whole list. Everything else, he basically argued, was a luxury that often becomes more of a distraction or a burden than a help. And here's how he defined it. A necessary of life isn't just something that's nice to have. It's something so fundamental that, as he puts it, almost no human, whether from savageness or poverty or philosophy, ever even tries to live without it. Anything that's not on that list, he argued, is a positive hindrance to the elevation of mankind. Wow. Okay, so that's the philosophy. But Thoreau wasn't just an armchair philosopher. He was all about putting his ideas to the test. It wasn't enough to just think about living simply. He had to actually do it. So now we get to the really fun part, the nuts and bolts of how he literally built his own freedom.
I absolutely love this detail. He starts this grand project of total self-reliance by borrowing an axe. But, as he said, it was a nice way to let his friends feel like they had a stake in his project. And with that one borrowed tool, he went into the woods and started cutting down pine trees to build his house. So how much do you think it cost him to build a house, a shelter that would give him the freedom to live his life on his own terms? This was the grand total. $28.12.5. I mean, seriously. To put that in perspective, back in 1845, that was less than what a student at nearby Harvard College paid for a year's rent.
And you gotta love this. He kept a detailed receipt for us. Just look at this breakdown. He bought refuse shingles for roof and sides for just $4. 2 second-hand windows for $2.43. The boards, which were his biggest expense, came from a shanty he bought from a railroad worker and took apart. This wasn't some abstract idea. This was the real-world accounting of what freedom costs.
Okay, so he built the house for next to nothing. But could the whole experiment actually sustain itself? How do we even measure if his 2 years in the woods were a success or a failure? Well, Thoreau, being a pretty meticulous guy, kept a detailed ledger of everything.
And here it is, the final balance sheet. His total expenses for everything, the house, his food for 8 months, his farm, came to about $62. His total income from selling some of his beans and doing a little day labor was under $37. So if you do the math, he ended up more than $25 in the hole.
By any normal business standard, this is a total disaster, right? He lost money. He didn't turn a profit. But this is exactly the kind of thinking Thoreau wanted to blow up. Is money the only way we can measure the value of our time in our lives?
This was his answer. The real profit wasn't something you could count in dollars and cents. It was measured in things that money can't always buy. Leisure time to think and to write, total independence from a boss, his own health, and a comfortable house that he owned free and clear. That was the real return on his investment. And this leaves us with Thoreau's ultimate equation, his final definition of value. It's not about the price tag, it's about the life cost. How many hours of your one precious life do you have to trade for that car, that phone, that bigger house? That's the question Thoreau went into the woods to figure out. And really, it's the question he leaves for every single one of us.